This is episode 142 of Stand Up. Joining me today, Army veteran and military historian, author Andy Bacevich. That conversation begins at 8:50. Then I get Bruce Bartlett to join me. Our conversation begins at 42 minutes and 55 seconds. Then I have at an hour 17, Bill B. in D.C., if you want to jump to that. And finally, my conversation with Dr. Barry Hummel, who is also a listener and subscriber like Bill, longtime supporter. Dr. Barry Hummel begins at an hour 41. My name is Pete Dominic. It is time to stand up with me right now. Hello and welcome to episode 142, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me, and thank you and welcome to a bunch of new subscribers here to the show. You can get a paid subscription at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. We'll go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. This podcast is available each and every day. I have conversations with several of the smartest people I can find about the most important issues that matter to you and your family, your community, your country, and planet. I want to thank Tara from Atlanta. $5 she signed up for. Max Langlois, $10 a month. Stephen Round just joined for $10 a month. Bill Holmes edited his pledge up from $5 to $10. Jason Sachs signed up with a $5 subscription. Casey Peterson just became a $10 patron. Ryan Thompson became a $5 patron. Phil Round became a $5 patron. John Zickafus, hey Johnny, just edited his pledge from $25 to $50 a month. John, thank you very much. And Christine Rogers also just became a $25 subscriber to the show. If you haven't subscribed yet, I hope that you will, because it's a lot of work putting this together every day, and I cannot do it without your support, because this is my job now. Oh, I got a great lineup of guests joining me today. 4 awesome guests on today's show. Had great conversations. Real excited to share those with you. It is Tuesday, July 14th, and lots to talk about with you. 111 days until November 3rd, Election Day. And what do you need to know today? A record 5.4 million people lost their health care coverage amid the pandemic, according to a new study that was a headline at the New York Times. California has imposed a sweeping rollback of its reopening plans amid surging cases of coronavirus out in California. Texas may be forced to roll back more of its reopening plans. 17 states joined the legal effort to block a rule that's revoking visas from foreign students taking virtual classes. Dr. Anthony Fauci returned to the White House after Trump aides moved to undercut him. As a matter of fact, this morning we saw a tweet from President Trump retweeted a message from the former Love Connection host Chuck Woolery. That's right, accusing the CDC of lying about the severity of the virus and what is needed to combat it. Isn't that weird? It's his CDC, and he's saying they are lying. And he's retweeting a fellow game show host, Chuck Woolery, who is a real POS, if you ask me. Anyway, what else do I have to tell you? Hong Kong closes gyms and cinemas and banned gatherings of more than 4 to stem a new outbreak in Hong Kong. And here in New York, they put a new restriction for travelers from 19 states that are now going to be required to quarantine and asked to provide contact information to. How do you enforce that, though? I mean, anybody can come into the state, just drive into the state. And we don't have checkpoints when people are coming in. It seems like a tough thing to enforce. So lots more to talk about with you here at the opening, but I do have 4 guests today, and so I don't want to go on too long. A couple of things I wanted to play for you. I heard that Ed Yong was on CNN with Christian Amanpour, and he is one of the most respected experts on coronavirus. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic who lives here in the States, but as you can hear in this clip, he is got a British accent. But he has been a go-to for a lot of the people I respect the most, including my friend Dr. Aaron Carroll, touts a lot of what he says. And I feel good because what he is saying is, well, I shouldn't say I feel good, because what he says in this clip is pretty tough, pretty bad, pretty terrible. And it's what I said, I think, to a couple guests on today's episode, which is that even if we have a vaccine, is it going to work if people don't take it? Here is Ed Yong on CNN with some of his concerns.
You know, if you'd asked me this question earlier on in the pandemic, I would have given you a science-based answer about how long the process of vaccine creation will take. Now I would give you a sociological answer. I would say that what the question that most concerns me is not how long will it take a vaccine to arrive, but can a country that is doing so badly as we are right now at controlling COVID-19 roll out a vaccine in a way that is equitable, efficient, and I'm not sure I have faith in that process. Let me give you 3 predictions for our vaccines. Firstly, that a lot of people are going to resist the very idea of getting it because they've been told for months, years now, not to trust experts. That the people who have been most marginalized during this pandemic, who've been disproportionately hit, Black, brown, poor, indigenous, disabled, elderly people, will be last in line to get a medical countermeasure that's developed, and that the deployment of such a vaccine is just going to be a logistical nightmare. A country that 7 months into a pandemic still cannot ensure that its healthcare workers have enough gowns and gloves and protective equipment is not going to be able to distribute a vaccine in an efficient way. It simply isn't. And so I worry a lot about even this end game being another area we look back on with dismay. And we need stronger leadership. We need more equitable leadership if we are going to deal with this. We can't just rely on a biomedical silver bullet.
All right, that is Ed Yong of the Atlantic magazine on CNN. Important and scary stuff, but I'm trying to be as real and transparent as I can with you while trying to also find the goodness and the happy moments and stay in the moment. There's an amazing community of people who listen to this podcast. I'm so glad to have you listening, and thank all of you for welcoming me back after a week off. Really nice messages, lots and lots of really nice messages welcoming me back, as well as on yesterday's show with Eddie Glaude Jr. and Eric Siegel. And today I've got 4 awesome guests. I know I say this a lot about many of my guests, but I love talking to people. I love talking to smart people. I love to try to keep the conversation moving and interesting and relevant and important. And I think I did a good job with Andrew Bacevich with that effort. Andy is become a friend of mine to some extent, and I really enjoy talking to him. He is a interesting, fascinating guy who graduated from West Point, who served in Vietnam, who went on to have a really impressive career in the military. He then became a professor of history, and most prominently at Boston University. Graduated from Princeton as well, where he got his PhD, and sadly lost his only son in the Iraq War. He was serving in the Iraq War, died fighting in May of 2007. Not something that I've ever really talked at length with him about, other than knowing that it's the worst thing that happened in his life. Of course, he does have 3 other children, 3 girls, 3 women. But just a really great guy who I've gotten to know well, who I love his books, I love his writing, and I love talking to him. We had a really great conversation. I'm really happy with this conversation. Some good laughs. He's a straight shooter. It's probably a double entendre. And I'm really happy that I got a chance to talk to him. I think you're going to really like this conversation now with Andrew Bacevich, who's not on social media, and I think humorously talks about why he's not, and I respect him for it. But here's our conversation right now. All right, there he is, Andy Bacevich. First time I've had him on, I think the second time, but this is just he and I and having a longer conversation, which I'm very excited about. It's been way too long. Thank you for joining me.
Glad to be with you, Pete.
I feel like a lot of the issues that you're an expert on, that you've been writing about for your whole career, have been set aside, just like everything else, based on this pandemic, which affected the economy and obviously the Black Lives Matter movement. But that doesn't mean they aren't as important as they've always been. But how do you just feel about the media's general coverage of our conflicts and our occupations, or our what's going on in Afghanistan, obviously in the Middle East, all these things that you read about, military history, all of it. It's just nobody's paying attention to anything but the pandemic. And
Absolutely.
It would seem.
I wrote a piece about 10 days ago that played off of Martin Luther King's famous 1967 speech at Riverside Church. This was a speech in which he denounced the Vietnam War and got in a certain amount of trouble because, hey, wait a second, you're supposed to do civil rights. You're not supposed to be talking about foreign policy.
Right.
And what Dr. King said in that speech was that fixing the country, really saving our soul, will require, yes, addressing racism, but also addressing militarism, and also addressing what he called extreme materialism. And he called these the giant triplets that were undermining our democracy and corrupting corrupting us. And one of the points I was making in that piece is we do seem to be in a moment when, yet again, we've discovered that race is a great American sin that needs to be addressed head on. And it could be, maybe, that this time our fellow citizens actually mean that. Maybe, we'll see. But the burden of my essay was to say, well, wait a second. Yes, let's target racism, but how about militarism? How about the materialism, which is so central to our culture? And as you know enough about what I write about, the militarism is sort of the thing that I am preoccupied with. And to your point, here we are in July of an election year, and there is appropriately a whole heck of a lot of talk about racism and some other matters, and the wars are being ignored. And I find that very troubling.
What about materialism? How do you define it?
That's being ignored too.
Well, I'm not ignoring it right now. I'm asking you about it. In this piece I just found, Martin Luther King's giant triplets. Racism, yes, but what about militarism and materialism? What do you mean materialism? What did he mean?
Yeah, so I'm a conservative Catholic, and one aspect of my conservatism is to be very skeptical of the market, of sort of an idolatry of the market. Yes, the market is the way we create wealth, but no, the market should not dominate our lives. And I'm also wary of the way that the prevailing definition of happiness, of a good life, focuses on material goods. I mean, we are just deluged with messages. And a lot of them come from Madison Avenue. That you'll be happier if you just, trade in your Mercedes-Benz and get a BMW. I assume you drive one of those two cars.
I drive both.
Or that you'll be happier if you, empty your closet and, get a whole bunch of flashy new clothes, or that, by God, if your iPhone is more than a year old, you need to get the latest model. I mean, this is so much part of our accepted, it's not particularly controversial, accepted notion of what it is to live a fulfilling life. And Dr. King was pushing back against that. I mean, again, that was one of the giant triplets. And this, again, as with militarism, there's not a whole hell of a lot of, there are always people sort of on the fringes of society, the counterculture, hippies.
Oh, yeah.
Who drop out, go live off the land.
My friend Peter Coyote. Yeah.
Peter Coyote. I mean, who's a wonderful human being.
Love him to death.
And has had a fascinating life journey.
Yep. So glad you're familiar with him.
Oh, I've only met him once.
So you have met him. I was going to say, I'd love to get you guys on together.
I went to lunch. I was out promoting a book in. We're getting off track here.
That's fine.
I was out promoting a book in Where's he live, in San Francisco or LA?
Northern California.
Okay, and he invited me to lunch. We never met.
Oh.
I didn't know who he was, really.
He knew who you were. Oh, wow.
He
I'm going to share whatever you say about him. So tell me about that.
I admire him in many ways, but he is God's gift to narrating documentary films.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's the greatest.
He's just so good at it. Anyway, we had a wonderful lunch, and he gave me a copy of his first memoir. What's it called? Sleeping Where?
I've got to find it.
Sleeping Where I Fall, or Sleeping.
I got it on my bookcase right behind me. I think I'm going to find it.
Anyway, I have it. I read it. So it's a wonderful memoir. He's been on a spiritual journey that I greatly respect. I just think he's a wonderful man. And he and I come from such radically places.
But you're probably about the same age, right?
Yeah.
He might be older than you.
But he's just great. If somebody said to me that you can go out to you're only going to go out to dinner one more time, you got to find 3 people to go with you. Peter Coyote would be on my list.
Wow,
so
you're just saying that I would bring nothing to that table, but I would love to be at it and tape it. It's good. That first memoir is Sleeping Where I Fall. The Rain Man's Third Cure is also great. I didn't actually read Sleeping Where I Fall. I should, but I recently saw him, and I just want to say, while we're talking about Peter, so you know it, that guy he was, when I lost my job at Sirius, I haven't talked to you about that either. I really want to tell you all about that, but it was the worst time in my life, and he came through huge for me. I mean, he really almost literally talked me off a cliff. And he's just been an amazing mentor to me and a great guy. But it is weird to hear you talk about, decry materialism, seen as that I'm looking at you and you're wearing Gucci and Ray-Ban and you're in a Land Rover. Should we not, was that not for air? Should I not say that? It seems hypocritical. No, I'm just kidding. What is that, a Hanes t-shirt?
It's no, it's a little bit more upscale. It's LL Bean.
Okay, and let's just look at you, and let's just find out where you are. What is your iPhone model?
I don't have an iPhone.
Oh, I
refuse to have one. My wife has one. My wife got one a few months ago.
Do you not have a mobile phone?
I do not have a mobile phone.
What is that life like?
It's okay. I mean, there are times when it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
When you're away from your computer, you're away from your landline, you need to talk to somebody, and it's complicated. And of course, you're not going to find a payphone anywhere to sort of put your quarters in. But on balance, this goes back to the point about, being on Twitter, which
you are not.
It seems to me, from my friends, can kind of take over your life.
Oh, hell yeah.
And
every day.
And not just take it over, but I don't want to use the word corruption. That's not right. Coarsen your life.
I think it can corrupt your soul. I think corruption is okay. I think it can corrupt your soul. It can corrupt moments. You can be having an amazing moment in your life with your family and nature, and you look at your phone and you see a tweet and it's all gone. Boom. Something terrible happened. So
I have no desire to be on social media, and I'm pretty stubborn that I'm not going to do that. And I don't, I suppose somebody would say, yeah, but you could have a larger quote unquote presence. But I don't need it at this stage
you're not an ego-driven man. I don't think you ever have been. But the other issue, the other thing about you is that you are a long-form guy. Andrew Bacevich is best in long form. Andy Bacevich is best in a book or in an article, not in a cable news segment where he's not able to talk.
I'm not very good on.
Well, you're
not.
That's because you're such a thoughtful person, and you don't want to cram it into 1 minute, and you don't want to be asked questions by an unprepared jackass. But also, and that's why social media isn't your thing. You don't want to put out, 280 characters or whatever it is, a couple sentences. You want to write books and write articles because the issues that you write and talk about and are an expert on are very complex, and nuance is dead.
But I mean, yes, and the and part is that if you're playing that game, even if you've only got 280 characters to play with, you need to put it up now. You don't have time to reflect.
Well,
there's a demand for immediacy.
People demand to hear from me specifically all day. Like, they need to know what Pete Dominick thinks. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are not able to even cope without my tweets to get them through the day. Is what I've told myself.
What's the term, followers? How many followers do you have?
The narcissism with which, like, if I don't tweet or I don't talk or I don't whatever, and people are not going to be informed. They're waiting for me. The truth is, actually, you are one of the people who I'm waiting for your reaction. I was thinking about it today as I was preparing an interview. I was like, I want to know what he thinks about this and this. Let me check his Twitter timeline. I'm sure he's talked about it. Of course, he's not on Twitter. He'll write a whole fucking book about it. Don't worry. And he'll crank them out week by week. It's unbelievable, your work ethic. But I do want to know what you think. And specifically, I want to know what you think about the news of the Russian president taking out a bounty on American members of the military in Afghanistan and what we know or think the president might have done with it. And my quick take on this is America, and you've written about this, has time and time again funded insurgencies and guerrillas to kill especially Russians in Afghanistan, or we can talk about Central America, or we can talk about anywhere else in the Middle East. But the difference would be in what the other leader of the nation who we're fighting this proxy war over knows and how they handle it. I think that would be the difference. But that's the way I kind of look at it and set it up. So take it from there. What are your thoughts on?
So number one, I'm not following this story, minute to minute. It's all over the press. But it's not clear to me that we actually know for sure that the Russians were paying the Taliban to kill American soldiers. There's lots of smoke, but we don't quite see the fire. I'm not suggesting that this didn't happen. I'm just saying I don't think we have concrete evidence. That's point number one. Point number two is what you just alluded to. I mean, the Russians are adversaries. And if you look at it from the Russian point of view, they have every reason to see us as adversaries. Now, I don't for a second, approve of paying people to kill American soldiers. I think that's a horrible thing. But good golly, should we not recall U.S. policy during the decade of the 1980s when we were funneling millions and millions of dollars of armaments to the so-called freedom fighters, the Afghan resistance forces, who were killing thousands of Russian soldiers at that time. We would say, well, it was in a good cause. Those Russian soldiers should not have invaded and should not have been occupying Afghanistan. You can make a case that we shouldn't be occupying Afghanistan here almost 20 years after we invaded the place. So I think it's hard to make moral judgments on these matters. And I think it's important, as we try to reach more moral judgment, we also ought to sort of examine this through the lens of international politics. And international politics is a dirty, ugly business where nations do whatever they can to take advantage of other nations, and we have done that to the Russians time and time again. But I'm not apologizing for that, but we need to understand what's going on here.
But the difference is
none of that is captured in the media commentary.
Well, I feel like the most important point is the difference. What's different here is that two foreign powers are in conflict or adversarial. And when we find out that our enemy, if you will, is doing something wrong, we do nothing. You've written books about how much we have screwed up in our reactions to so many things and how things could have been done differently. But in none of your books do you say do nothing when a foreign power interferes in our election. This president, Russia interfered in our election. I don't know what you think about all of that, but they definitely, they would seem they absolutely did a lot of things to interfere in our election and to help President Trump. He still hasn't done anything, and I'm not suggesting a policy prescription. I am, however, suggesting that he shouldn't continue to do favors for the Russian president.
I'm with you. And
this is what seems unprecedented, not only with America, but with Russia, with any other foreign country.
You know, I was talking to my wife about this this morning. You have to think, when you examine Trump's deference toward Putin, and you say, well, why is that happening? It's very difficult to avoid the suspicion that Putin has something on the president, that there is some deep, blackmailable secret that Putin knows, and that Trump will do anything to avoid having that come to light.
The defense of that is
that's based on no evidence whatsoever.
Right.
Just you try to understand why this could possibly be happening.
The only way I can explain it without thinking that there is something that he has on him, which I think there is, but the only way I can explain it is that he is attracted to the biggest assholes in the world, autocrats, authoritarians. Yeah. He pays fealty to, he's in love with the North Korean leader, the leader of Brazil, the leader of Hungary, the Saudi Arabian king. He loves brutal dictators.
Yep. Can't stand Angela Merkel.
She's the worst, of course.
Probably the finest sort of democratic politician.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't love women in charge, let's be clear. The way that you and I put our wives above everything else and let them, follow their lead with no nobleness about it, it just works. He does not do that with any of his wives. So
anyway, but let's get to the policy issue. I mean, the policy issue is he ain't doing nothing, and seems even reluctant to find out if the Russians really are implicated in this, and that's deeply wrong. So then you say, well, what ought U.S. policy to be
towards Russia
toward Russia
for the interference in the election, the bounties, any number of things, or for.
Yeah. I think. First off, is let us acknowledge that they are an unfriendly country, to put it mildly, and therefore the sort of activities that we would undertake with a even moderately friendly country ought to be off limits. No trade. No inviting Putin to become, once again, join the G7. Certainly maintain diplomatic relations, but, they recognize that the relationship is an exceedingly cold one. No favors whatsoever. And resistance to Russian foreign policy initiatives. Whether they're in Syria or wherever they are. Now, resistance doesn't mean we have to send in U.S. troops, but we should use our influence to do whatever we can to make life uncomfortable for Vladimir Putin and frustrate his ambitions. Guess what? Someday he's going to die, and therefore someday there may be an opportunity for a different relationship with Russia, but as long as he's in charge, there's no chance, and we sort of need to recognize it, and that's one of the things that our president, who thinks he's the master of the deal, is unwilling to do.
The idea that he was able to sell that concept to people, the art of the deal, based on his shitty real estate company, will always be one of the most confounding things, especially for New Yorkers who know him and have dealt with him. But yeah. And then, John Bolton just came out and said he might be good at making a real estate deal, but he has no idea about any kind of working in government. What do you think about John Bolton?
Well, I can't stand the guy. I mean, he's arrogant, I think, doesn't begin to describe his manner. And I think the word that would describe his worldview is crude and out of date. He I think clings to some of the notions that were sort of floating around right after the Cold War. The world was now our oyster. We were going to issue the orders and people were going to comply. And therefore, his contempt for international institutions, because he viewed them as impediments. They were getting in the way. I think he still clings to that. So apart from sort of wanting the United States to throw its weight around, and sadly, our weight we're not as impressive as we might have been 30 years ago. It doesn't seem to me he really has much to offer, as a policymaker. So, what do you get, a $2 million advance on his book or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
And supposedly people are buying it. Every review I've read of the book says it's a crappy book.
That's got to be maddening for an author as good as you, as prolific as you, with as much integrity as you.
I'm not in competition with him as a book writer, but I regret the fact that all these people are wasting their money so that he can enrich himself. And as many people have said, geez, if the president is such an incompetent nincompoop, why didn't you tell us that when it might have been useful? And the answer is, well, I had this book contract, and that took precedent.
Forgive me for just then projecting my own insecurities about my own career onto you. You don't have the issues with ego that most of us do. So, but let me go back to one other thing, because we were talking about your piece about Dr. King and materialism and militarism, but you also have a piece that you wrote, an op-ed that you jointly wrote with a veteran of the Iraq and Afghanistan era, Danny Sigurdsson, about renaming army posts. Who better to talk about this than the both of you? You're a graduate, of course, of West Point, and
so is Danny.
So is Danny. I don't need to give your bona fides. Anyway, the article is saying that you should rename army posts, and you make suggestions as to who they should rename them. We don't have time to go through all of them, but make the case.
Well, I mean, we wrote this slightly tongue-in-cheek, not tongue-in-cheek, with the notion that the absurdity, really the offensiveness of naming U.S. Army posts after Confederate generals. And I have believed for a long time that was a mistake. I actually wrote an article a couple of years earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Robert E. Lee is still enshrined at West Point. There's a Lee Gate. There's a Lee Barracks. There's portraits of Robert E. Lee. I mean, good God, this guy killed more Americans than any military officer in history.
So weird. Do you know when those started? Did those people talk about that? A lot of the Confederate commemorations began during the Civil Rights era, the 50s and 60s, when they started.
No. They I believe I'm correct in saying that this dates from the beginning of Jim Crow. In other words, after Reconstruction, just as a general date, the 1890s, right? The system of Jim Crow was being legalized and implemented across the South. And one effort to elevate white supremacy, to give it some kind of moral stature, was to remember the heroes of the Confederacy, like Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart, and so on. And that's when, as I understand it, most of the statues were put up. Not just statues of the big generals, but the statue of the Confederate soldier that is in the town square of the little town in Tennessee. And there was a political purpose to doing this. And the political purpose was to make a public statement that the lost cause was an honorable cause, and that the subordination of Black people of the freemen was itself justified and moral. Now, when I was a cadet at West Point back in the 1960s, and there was all this, the honoring of Confederates who had gone to West Point. I didn't respond to that. Politically, I was not particularly, with it. And as far as we were concerned, a great Confederate general was a great general, and therefore he deserved respect, and he ought to be studied. We ought to learn how Robert E. Lee won the Battle of Chancellorsville, because someday we're going to, presumably apply some of his insights. So I was myself not. I took it for. People said we're supposed to. If there's a Lee Hall, I guess that's okay by me. It's only as I became, older, more politically aware and more aware of racism, that I began to come around to a realization that, Jesus, this is nuts. It's nuts for West Point to honor graduates who are Confederates. It's nuts of the United States Army to honor Confederate generals.
It's damaging. You say it's nuts, but it's damaging to the mission of the military or the country. Like, it's not just crazy. It actually creates tremendous damage.
It's evil. Yes. Yeah. Yes. You're 100%. Your choice of words is better than
well,
mine.
as you know, I'm a wordsmith.
There you go.
Let me ask you one final question, because I want to stick to the time. You have to go. I think you have to go write a book in an hour. But I think you have a book that you have to start and finish in the next 2 hours. But the you just mentioned that you were a cadet at West Point in the 60s. First of all, why did you go to West Point, and why then? Did you know what was happening in Southeast Asia when you joined? Because I think I read, at least according to Wikipedia, you graduated West Point in 1969 and shipped out to Vietnam in the summer of 1970. And that's anybody that knows a little bit about the Vietnam War knows that was the peak in terms of the violence and the casualties, American casualties.
Yeah, actually, when I got there, we were past the peak. But
it was close, 68, 69, right?
Yeah, but to your question, so I showed up July 1st, 1965. 1965 is the first year of the American War, when we started sending large numbers of combat troops. So we were still at the very beginning. When I decided to go, I don't know when I made the decision to go. Probably it was like in February 1965. There was not a big American war in Vietnam. So Vietnam was irrelevant to my decision to go to West Point. Why did I go? Well, number one, it was free. It's free as in when you graduate, you owe them 5 years of your life. But nonetheless, there was no tuition.
Yeah, right.
Number two, my parents were veterans. Both of my parents were deeply patriotic, veterans of World War II. And so military service, was part of, that is an honorable and a good, that's sort of in the air that I breathed as a kid, growing up in our household. The other thing is, and I've only come to realize this as I've gotten old, I have my brothers have got the same problem. We have OCD runs in our family, obsessive compulsive disorder. I dislike disorderly things. I mean, I'm looking at your listeners don't know, I'm looking at your office, and I feel this compulsion to go in there and sort of make your bookshelves a little bit neater. I'm slightly exaggerating, but only slightly.
I would love for you to come over, by the way.
Yeah, the military, on the surface, the military is, everything is orderly.
Right.
Everything looks the way it's supposed to look. And from from where I am in life today, I think that one of the reasons I was drawn to the military is because everything was going to look squared away. It's absurd. It's just ridiculous. But I was drawn to order, and military service generally, and West Point in particular. It looks orderly, even if it's not. So that's why I went. And it was only while we were there, our 4 years at school, that's when the Vietnam War got big. That's when the anti-war movement got big. That's when the problems that came to really infest the Army of racial tensions, widespread drug abuse, indiscipline, they all were brewing during that period of time when we were stuck away up the Hudson River. So the country was coming apart. We were up there watching.
Right.
Anyway, and so by the time we got in the Army, the Army was in bad shape, and the Vietnam War was already basically a lost cause. And that was my introduction to actual military service.
Do you think that was the first war, maybe Korea before, I don't know much about the Korean War, where there was a preponderance of actual men mostly serving that were confused as to why they were fighting? Was that the first war where Americans fought and they weren't sure what the mission was, or that it was not appropriate, not lawful, not legal even?
I think there was considerable confusion about Korea, particularly after the Chinese intervened in late 1950, and the aim of the war became not to win it, but to prevent it from getting bigger and not to lose it. I think that was very difficult for the American public to grasp, and it was very difficult for soldiers to grasp. They had all been told that, hey, you go to war so you can win, so you can go home. But that phenomenon was much worse in Vietnam, in part because it went on longer, and also in part because dissent on the home front during Vietnam was orders of magnitude greater than the dissent during the Korean War.
I would love to know next time about what you thought about that dissent then and what you think about it now. But I will let you go this time. I wish I could keep you longer. I would like to see your space, see how organized it is. But I mean, you're probably a minimalist, right? Probably.
Well, up here in my study, yeah. Anyway, let's do this again sometime.
I really appreciate it, Andy. Thanks for joining me. Great to have you. All right.
Bye.
Andy Bacevich, get all of his books and read all of his articles. One of my all-time favorite folks to talk to. I know I say that a lot, but that's what I do for a living. I talk to people, so I generally like him and really fascinated and interested in talking to all of them, especially and including my next guest, Bruce Bartlett, on Twitter, at Bruce Bartlett. He's now writing a column for The New Republic, and his most recent piece is what we talked about, mostly about today, the increasing anti-intellectualism of the Republican Party. His most recent piece is titled The GOP's Murderous Anti-Intellectualism. And Bruce is a longtime friend and guest of the show, a former Republican who worked for many Republicans and has been bounced out of the Republican conservative movement years ago for writing a book critical of George W. Bush. We talked a little bit about that. We talked about, as I mentioned, this article and more. Always a great conversation with Bruce Bartlett. Let's do it. Hey, Bruce Bartlett.
Hey, Pete Dominic.
We did it. We did the opening. Thank you very much for joining me. This piece at New Republic getting a lot of attention. The GOP's murderous anti-intellectualism. 21st century's version of the Know-Nothing Party has taken the wanton disregard for knowledge to dizzyingly destructive heights. Oh, such an important piece. What was there a catalyst? Was there a moment? Was there something that was said or done that made you want to write this as your latest piece at the New Republic?
Nothing in particular. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. And obviously the situation has gotten vastly worse with the gross incompetence of Trump's handling of the pandemic. I mean, it's just absurd. You know, he goes months and months telling people, it's a hoax, don't bother to wear a mask. And then all of a sudden he decides to start wearing one, you know. And predictably, the idiots in the mainstream media say, oh, he looks so presidential. He's finally acting like a real
Who said
leader.
That? Name them. I want to find them and attack them.
Oh, gee, somebody did just yesterday. I forget who it was. I'm sorry, but they do this all the time. I mean, you've seen it before. They look for any excuse to say Trump is being the opposite of what he is, namely presidential. And also just today, I don't know if you saw this, but I posted a new survey of political scientists, and they ranked all of the presidents, and Trump came in dead last. I mean, he was even below William Henry Harrison, who only served 30 days.
Well, it must be a list of liberal political scientists.
Actually, they had conservatives as well, and you can go in there if you can gain access to the original article and see how self-described liberals and self-described conservatives ranked the presidents, so that you can, and there's not that much difference.
Well, before we get into the specifics of your piece, which is fantastic, and very few people know the history of the conservative movement and Republican Party, at least the last 30 years, as well and as intimately as you, Bruce Bartlett, I have a listener and a supporting paid subscriber of mine who's constantly getting on me that I'm not interviewing enough alternative voices and so on. And he suggests that I have somebody from Cato or AEI or one of these more conservative think tanks. But my opinion, Bruce, is that even the conservative columnists such as Mark Thiessen, who he also recommends, who is a columnist at the Washington Post, they don't represent these think tankers, and these Washington newspaper and even magazine columnists don't represent Trump supporters. They don't. Trump supporters are represented by Alex Jones, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and the president himself. Conspiracy theorists in general, they're not represented by even the more serious kind of think tank and conservative columnists. What do you think of that?
Well, that's certainly true. And Thiessen is a complete nincompoop. I mean,
a horrible person. Yeah, but still,
yeah, he's a horrible human being. And the Post should be ashamed of itself for publishing somebody like that.
Agreed.
But I can see what pressure they're under to have some columnists who are, unambiguously pro-Trump, but they can't find anybody who's not incompetent, because there's no way you can defend Trump except by making up lies and making utterly ridiculous arguments. I mean, one of the things that I wrote about a couple of weeks ago are never Trump conservatives who have left the Republican Party and given up on it. And just today, there was a very interesting article in the Guardian newspaper about Anne Applebaum, who you may be familiar with, who is pretty much given up on conservatism. And she was, one of the leading lights of conservative foreign policy theory. So I think that you're seeing more and more of these apostates. They just can't take it anymore. Now, the question for me is, what took you so long, Because I gave up on the Republican Party and the conservative movement, 15 years ago. And maybe that was a little too late for some people's tastes, but at least I did it. And the irony is I left because I thought George W. Bush was too stupid to be the leader of a party that I belong to.
Yeah.
But, the sad thing is I take George back in a minute in place of Trump, because at least he wasn't crazy, or at least not on everything. I mean, he did a few good things. And one of the things that he did is he listened to people and took advice from experts. And one of the things he did, among others, was build up our capacity to deal with pandemics. And Obama built on that. And almost as soon as Trump took office, he simply got rid of the whole system.
Right.
And tens of thousands of Americans are dead because of Trump's incompetence. That's the number of people over and above would have died if we had handled this in a competent manner.
Well, but you talk about anti-intellectualism. You talk about stupidity and willful ignorance and incompetence in your piece at the New Republic. But, there's a difference between supporting a certain kind of economics or tax policy like supply side economics. There's a difference between thinking that affirmative action has one outcome or another outcome, and what today's Republican Party and conservatives believe, which is, I believe, they overwhelmingly believe in things that didn't happen, and they don't believe in things that did happen. We're not talking about policies. We're talking about the Newtown shooting did not occur. We're talking about there is no climate change. Vaccines don't work. And most recently, you can buy a kid on Wayfair.com online. Those aren't, I would say, anti-intellectualism or I don't know what you would name those, but that seems to be the overarching philosophy amongst a lot, I don't know how high a percentage of Trump supporters, and it is led by people like Sean Hannity, who believe in the Seth Rich conspiracy and so on. That's where my mind is at and on.
Well, I think that they're related, and I discussed that in my article today about how anti-intellectualism leads naturally to belief in conspiracy theories. And of course, belief in conspiracy theories leads naturally to anti-intellectualism. So they mutually reinforce each other. And a lot of these problems have to do with, as you said, a denial of objective reality and of denying empirical evidence. And that's where a lot of problems come into on some of these policy issues, like say, supply-side economics, which has a certain theoretical plausibility. It's just that the people who advocate it never look at the evidence. And if you show them the evidence, they simply ignore it. I mean, look at Larry Kudlow. There's never any problem that doesn't require more tax cuts for the rich. It's just dogma. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that a great many, maybe even a majority of Republicans are evangelical Christians. And these people, they just accept things on faith. That's the nature of being an evangelical, is the word of God is in the book, and you take the book literally, and you ignore reality because that contradicts the book. And since you can't contradict the book, you simply ignore reality.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. So often people do get to religious beliefs, and I used to be the first one to get to them, and I haven't been talking about it as much as kind of where the root of it all begins. But I think you're absolutely right to connect the religiosity to believing in a lot of these conspiracy theories. So, but what about like the William F. Buckleys of the world? You write about him in this new piece, and it's really interesting how you write about him. And was he a conservative heavyweight intellectual, or was he just a guy who had an extensive vocabulary?
Well, I think it depends on what time era you're comparing him to. I mean, Bill Buckley would be, an Albert Einstein in the Republican Party today. But I think he was not, he was a popularizer. That was his job. He considered himself to be a journalist, not a philosopher, not a policy analyst. And his job was to try to build up political support for the ideas that he believed in. And he was not anti-intellectual by any means. He certainly played up his degree from Yale University, and he did use a lot of big words intentionally to at least project an image of someone who was highly intellectual, even if his knowledge of the actual subject matter was superficial at best. I mean, if you're writing 2 columns a week and giving a ton of speeches, you don't have a whole lot of time to do original research. And I think he depended on others to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And he did have a number of, first-rate intellectuals associated with National Review magazine, such as Jeffrey Hart, who was a professor of English at Dartmouth, and Russell Kirk, who wrote the seminal book on conservatism, and a number of other people, William Burnham. And so he was quite conscious that one of the things liberals had going for them in that era is that all the intellectuals, were liberals. And he thought this was prevented some people from accepting conservative ideas is because they just didn't have serious, important academic type people promoting their ideas.
So, but when I would watch Buckley debate Gore Vidal or Noam Chomsky, I highly recommend people go down those YouTube rabbit holes. I mean, I always felt like they wiped the floor with him, but maybe that's just my bias talking. But I mean, what you're saying in this piece is that Buckley, who said, what was the quote about the phone book versus?
Yeah, he said on numerous occasions he would rather be governed by the first 2,000 names in the phone book than by the Harvard faculty. And that was one of his shticks. But the thing is, he was just it was just shtick with him. It was like a throwaway. It was like a joke that you might tell in stand up.
Right.
It was just something he did because he got applause for it. And you have to remember, he was when you watch these Buckley debates, you have to remember he was a very skilled. I don't want to say entertainer. I can't think of quite the right word, but he was very conscious of the nature of the media more so than, a pure academic like Noam Chomsky, who comes across as, an academic whenever he talks, whereas Buckley was speaking to the people, the average people who watch television, you see. And I think if you think of it from the point of view of the average person, he was scoring points with them, but not necessarily with the people who listen carefully to the nature of the arguments.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
And I think Ronald Reagan was also did the same thing. He was always speaking to the people and not really paying that much attention to his opponents.
Oh, I think it's so true.
In debates and things of that sort.
Yeah, I think it's so true what you're saying about. That's how I hear conservative talk radio versus liberal talk radio. And I think that's why conservative talk radio dominates in terms of ratings, because it's so much more kind of entertaining and easier to understand, and which is why I got into radio, because I wanted to do that, but for liberal talk and just dumb it down a bit and have a thoughtful conversation. But we still can't do on the side of, I think, science what they can do on the side of anti-science. And that you mentioned Reagan constantly. I was watching some old clips of him talking about government is the problem. Okay, all right, let's unpack that, though. You are the governor of California. You are the president. If government is the problem, then what, and we're seeing that now so clearly that the federal government doesn't want to handle it. They hand it to the states. The state Republican government, they don't want to handle it. They hand it to the counties in terms of the virus. They don't actually like to govern. They don't actually have policy solutions. They just have slogans and sayings, is what I'm hearing you say.
Well, that's pretty much true. And of course, this whole situation has gotten vastly worse with the growth of and importance of Fox News. Now, earlier you talked about how guys like Sean Hannity essentially mainstream many of these crackpot conspiracy ideas. Maybe they cut some of the rough edges off and make them sound not quite so ridiculous, but they nevertheless give people spread these ideas out into the general milieu.
Yeah.
And of course, we just read the other day about how Tucker Carlson hired some really, really profoundly racist, homophobic guy to write his scripts for him, because
years ago, he had been doing it for years. He's been writing Tucker Carlson's monologues.
And apparently he was writing on I don't know whether it was Reddit or someplace, just horribly, horribly racist stuff, because I guess Tucker's wasn't racist enough for him.
Right. Tucker would take the rough edges off.
Every time you think you've hit rock bottom with these people, they find a way to go lower. It's really quite remarkable.
Dr. Aaron Carroll, who first introduced me to your work, tweets about once a day, there is no bottom. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a really, really interesting piece, well researched, as is everything that you do. You look at academic studies for this column, including recent political scientist writing an article about how populism and anti-intellectualism lend themselves naturally to the rejection of scientific expertise, which was a concern regarding climate change and continues to be, and was a concern regarding anti-vaccines. And now, to me, that's the most important concern, because if we got lucky and there were an effective vaccine, it wouldn't work because most people wouldn't take it because of what you're writing about in this column.
Yeah, that's quite true. A lot of people believe in something called herd immunity. And this is an important thing that does protect people in society from catching viruses, even if they're not vaccinated. But it gets perverted into an idea that, well, I don't have to be vaccinated because everybody else will get vaccinated and I'll be fine. And so when too many people have this idea, you cannot reach the threshold that it gives you the herd immunity, you see. And so there, like you said, if as many people who say that they're anti-vaxxers, as there are, you're really going to be in serious trouble. Now, you can get vaccinated yourself, but the real problem is for people like children whose parents won't get them vaccinated and they will get sick for no good reason at all, or people who have immune systems that are damaged for some reason, and they cannot get a vaccination without catching the disease, and various other people who, for one reason or another, can't be vaccinated. They depend on the people who can be vaccinated to, in effect, protect them.
Exactly. Well explained. Very well explained. I wish I would have been able to do that myself, but good job, of course. Let me ask you about a separate issue, but generally related, which I thought was interesting. I'm reading your Twitter timeline, and someone asked on Twitter, can you show me the names of anybody who has been canceled? And our friend David K. Johnson said Bruce Bartlett. What's he talking about?
Well, as you may know, some years ago, I wrote a book highly critical of George W. Bush. I thought he was a moron. And I thought that I didn't really want to be a member of a party that he was led by somebody like this. And it was really a microcosm of all this Trump stuff, except that it happened much earlier, and it wasn't apparently nearly as evident as it is now. But Bush did a lot of stupid things, and for stupid reasons, and I just got sick of it after a while, and I wrote a book. The whole book is really about what an idiot Bush was, but as a consequence, I was fired by the think tank I was working for, and I've been unemployed ever since.
You got canceled. You hadn't been able to get another job, but you've got a column now at the New Republic. You call that? Oh well, I do that for nothing. I don't make any money from that. Talking to the great Bruce Bartlett right now. He's on Twitter at Bruce Bartlett. He is one of my favorite people to talk to. A lot of people sharing this column of yours today, and I'm glad that they are. I don't know where we go from here, Bruce. I mean, I don't know how the Republican Party or the conservative movement changes or evolves. I mean, by the way, I don't even know that these labels matter less to me than they ever did. And if there's an accurate label, it would be Trumpist, Trumper, because
I often refer to the Republican Party as the party of Trump. I mean, he cites these data periodically about how 95% of Republicans support him, and he's right about that. I mean, that's what the data show. The problem is that in his mind, those are the only people he represents. If you didn't vote for Trump, if you don't support Trump, he doesn't represent you. And he doesn't care what you think, and he will adopt any kind of policy that hurts you as long as it helps his people. Now, I don't think he can win with that kind of strategy because the number of Republicans is declining as the number of the non-white population and people with alternative lifestyles or whatever you want to call it, as that number grows, those people are never going to become Trump supporters. They're never going to become Republicans. And I think that as time goes by, the National Republican Party is going to shrink to something like the Republican Party of California, which it still exists, but it has no power and no influence.
What do you generally think of? Do you generalize about academics and academia?
Some.
I mean, are they not people who should be listened to on a wide range of things? I mean, aren't they experts by definition?
Well, look, my attitude is, if I go to the doctor and I'm going to the best doctor I can find, I'm going to somebody who has a degree from a reputable medical school, and I'm going to assume that he is going to recommend cures or medicines to deal with whatever problems I have that are, consistent with whatever the generally accepted view is among doctors, and that if he comes across some problem that is out of his skill set, he'll refer me to somebody who's an expert. As you know, I had a brain tumor a few years ago, and I had to go to a neurologist and have surgery. I wasn't going to go to my own doctor to deal with that problem. It was clearly outside of his skill area, but he knew to who to recommend me to go see. Right now, everybody does this. If you want to see a lawyer, you want to make sure your contracts are drawn up properly so that they achieve whatever goal you're trying to accomplish of buying a house or selling a house or something of that sort. People who understand all this in their regular lives will, for some reason or another, think that a grossly uneducated, stupid person like Donald Trump knows what he's talking about, and Dr. Fauci, who's the leading expert on infectious diseases in the United States, doesn't.
Right.
I mean, I don't understand how this happens.
Well,
this disconnect between what you would do in your own personal life and what you do as a matter of public policy.
Well, now what people are doing in their own personal life is not often what's best for their health in terms of simply, obviously, vaccines. I mean, or even sometimes cancer and other things. I understand, by the way, when you try everything conventional and nothing works to cure your disease, and then you try something alternative. But that's different. You didn't try everything conventional. You didn't apply the consensus of what scientists or medical experts say on an issue before you tried everything else. But yeah, when it comes to science and medicine, I mean, I'm not sure why anybody thinks they're going to be able to second guess or know more than academics, people who have studied it and practiced it for their entire careers.
Well, look, I think, adults, who aren't, crazy, have the right to do these kinds of things. But the problem is, in many cases, they have children, and they impose their crackpot beliefs onto those children, and that's wrong. And no, I had another point that I was going to make, and I've forgotten it now.
Well, let me just say to that, because you brought it up. I mean, I have daughters who are 12 and 15, and one of my daughter's friends' parents are complete nut jobs. They are absolutely batshit crazy. And yesterday they shared on Facebook, on social media, I don't know if you heard about this, but that Wayfair, the online retailer, is selling,
I've heard something about this,
kids. Okay, this is my friend's parents. Today, that kid invited my daughter and a couple of other kids over to their house. Now, also today, that mom shared, or at some point recently on Instagram, a post that she's now going to be homeschooling that kid, my daughter's friend, because she doesn't want to have to send her kid to a school where they have to wear masks and they have to disinfect everything. And I said, listen, I'm not comfortable with you going to their house. I'm just not comfortable with it. They're not going to be responsible about practicing. The point being, she's destroying her kids' friendships. She's making it harder for her own child with her crazy beliefs. I'm basically illustrating in real life what you just said hypothetically.
Yeah. Well, frankly, I'd be a little concerned about even allowing that girl into my house if I was you.
I am.
Considering that she's going around unprotected, and who knows what, not using hand sanitizer, and
but imagine
not washing her hands.
It's the age-old thing that parents have always dealt with about, trying to decide who their kids can be friends with. But it's always been a value judgment, not a public health assessment, generally speaking. It's always been, I don't know if that kid's a good influence on you, I don't know if that kid's going to get you sick and everybody else sick just by being with you.
I'm glad I don't have children to worry about, because I don't know what I'd be thinking if I had to think about sending them back to school in a situation that where they're really not yet prepared to restart the school systems.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what it's like. Everybody's fighting. Couples are fighting with each other. They're fighting with their kids because we're just not all on the exact same page. Schools are fighting, communities are fighting. Everybody's arguing about what is the best way forward. But I want to end maybe on that question. How does this end? That's kind of the question I'm asking everybody I can this week. How does coronavirus end? Where does it end? When does it end? Does it end?
Well, I think we basically have to put all of our chips onto Big Pharma. We just have to hope that they know what the hell they're doing, that they invent a vaccine, that they invent drugs that will cure this virus, because all of the other methods of, public health protocols and competent leadership and things of that sort, it just are not working. Now, the question is, how many tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people are going to die between now and the time that we not only have a vaccination, but we can get it out into the public and get as many people as possible vaccinated. I mean, look at the problems we've had with testing, right? I mean, people cannot to this day get tests. They're having trouble processing these tests and getting people the results in a time-sensitive manner. You can imagine what it's going to be like when vaccinations are available. And it's looking to me like we're going to have multiple types of vaccines from different companies that are perhaps based on different underlying biological or pharmaceutical principles. And some of these may be rushed into the market. Who knows what Trump is going to do? He's still out there talking about this drug. What is it? Hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah. And I mean, there's absolutely no evidence that this does any good, but he's still claiming this is a cure. And who knows what crackpot. They're giving contracts to fly-by-night companies run by ex-Trump officials. They're getting billions of dollars, and they've never produced a drug in their lives or the history of their companies. Who knows what terrible stuff is going to be out there in the marketplace that people are going to be exposed to. I mean, think about this. You get a vaccine that doesn't work, and you think, oh, I'm invulnerable. I can do anything. And you just get rid of your mask. You go back to doing everything the same old way. And the next thing you know, you're sick.
Well, you say you put all your chips into pharmaceutical, and I think that's a fair and good point and not inaccurate. But before that, don't you have to put your chips in the election on November 3rd? Because even if, as you said, they were to come up with a vaccine, wouldn't public health policy still be the most important thing in terms of?
Well, that's not going to change until January at the earliest, right? So I don't think the election is going to change very much, because I don't think Trump's going to allow Biden to do anything. I think they're not even going to allow an ordinary transition of allowing, Biden's people into the departments and agencies to find out what's going on. They're going to be too busy running the shredder machines to try to destroy any evidence of their corruption before they're out the door on January 20. I think this is going to be the most horrible transition in the history of the United States.
How quaint it is for you to say shredder machines. You're being very polite, so they're going to use all sorts of fire, napalm, Willie Pete, maybe even nuclear weapons on any hard drive or in any document that they touched. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be bad that time if it is a free and fair election, which is a fair question to ask whether or not it will be. And if Joe Biden wallops him in the election or doesn't, I mean, if he doesn't, then Trump's going to try to ask for a recount or say there was some fraudulent outcomes. If he does, it'll be a harder case to make to win people over, arguably. But imagine if it was, razor thin like 2000, how that happened. But more importantly, during that November, December, January, however many weeks that is, I mean, what is going to happen during that time?
Well, we've had a number of elections over the last couple of months, and we've had terrible problems because they can't find poll watchers to come and just do the ordinary work of running an election. And one can easily imagine Trump and his allies shutting down virtually all of the polling places in Democratic areas and having them open only in Republican areas. About them, you talked about.
So sorry about that.
Yeah, I don't know where we got cut off or what happened.
You were just saying I can see an election where they don't have the polls open to as many Democratic voting districts. Is that what you were saying?
Well, that's one thing. That's one very easy way of manipulating the election, and they're going to have to be shutting down, election polling places because of the virus, because of a lack of staff and various other things. It will just make it too easy for crooked Republicans to fix the election right in plain sight. I mean, every single election cycle, you've probably seen this yourself. There are always stories about how in the minority areas there are long lines of people to get in to vote.
Right.
And, when the polling places close, there's still lines of people. I know out in where I live in a, wealthy Republican area, there are never any lines. You walk straight in, that's just the way they do it.
Right. Right. There's a lot of important people and organizations fighting that, but they are running out of time. So.
Right.
Who knows what's happened. All right. Well, I love talking to you. I love this article as always. And everybody should be following Bruce on Twitter, where he's awesome, at Bruce Bartlett. Bruce, thank you as always for your time and talking to me today. I appreciate it, pal.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Sorry about that. We got disconnected during that conversation, but I think I seamlessly edited it all back together. Bruce Bartlett, the great Bruce Bartlett. Tell me you heard him on the show, at Bruce Bartlett on Twitter. And always pleasure talking to that guy. I enjoy it. He makes me giggle. I love that guy. I can't think of anybody else who can care less about what people think about him or his views. He's just tells you what he thinks, and that's that. All right. So moving on, I reached out to my friend Bill Boyle, Bill B in D.C., because I asked a question yesterday, where does coronavirus end? I'm asking guests that question all week. We had a fascinating conversation, as always. I always love talking with Bill B in D.C. I always love talking with listeners. After Bill, coming up, I talk with Dr. Barry Hummel, who is a longtime listener and subscriber of the show. He's a physician down in Florida. Check in with him on all things about crazy Florida. But first, my conversation with Bill, which was sobering and honest and awesome as always. All right, Bill B in D.C. joins me now. Bill, you want to answer the question, how does the coronavirus, the pandemic, the plague end, whatever you want to call it? What do you call it? Where does it end? When does it end?
In some sense, it never does, in the sense that, it's going to affect things pretty much permanently as far as that matters to any of us. But I think that the harsh, dramatic, painful part of it goes through into the next year, into 2021, without question. And I think that because this isn't just sort of an anecdotal feeling about it. It's going to happen because of things like 32% of Americans didn't pay their mortgage last month, right? 12, 13 million people who right now are never going to get the job they had back. When the furloughs are up, those jobs are just not going to be offered again.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see, in fact, that number's like, something like 17, 18 million people will not get their old job back. A lot of small businesses that PPP got them through to now are running out of money, just as, the end of this month, the $600 additional for unemployment is going to run out. Also, evictions are now starting to kick in various states. And so what's happened so far has been the preamble. It's been the sort of that freeze you get after you got hit by a baseball bat and you're still in shock.
How many more metaphors do you think you can do to talk about the phase that we're in? Because I think they're all good. Because it is the preamble, and it's so helpful, as depressing as it is, to see how much more pain and struggle there is. I think it is helpful, which is why I'm asking the question, to be able to frame this in our mind. The uncertainty is what creates so much of the stress and the anxiety and the grief, and trying to have some kind of information, which is what you're using to speculate about where we go, where we're at, and how we're feeling is helpful. Do you have any more metaphors?
Yes, the building is on fire, but it hasn't fallen down yet. That's basically it. And
that one sucked. I wish I hadn't asked.
Well, here's the reason for it. So the fire being the coronavirus is still burning merrily along, worse than it was a month or two ago. And there's really no national plan, and there won't be a national plan as long as Trump's in the White House to deal with it. So we're going to have it flare up, die. And that is going to keep our economy completely fucked until at least the winter. And until at least, I mean, the out for this is very bluntly that Trump has to lose the election. Because if Trump doesn't lose the election, we're going to be in this same cycle for 2 years until a vaccine is developed for it. If Biden comes in, there's already going to be, Congress will say, okay, screw it. Let's start voting for things that will create a national plan, et cetera.
Right.
But until that happens, we're going to be in this getting burned by the virus. It goes away for a while. Things sort of half open. The virus rolls back again, and the cycle continues again.
Right. So I think that the most important date certainty, even then, that's uncertain, because even if he loses, people have a lot of questions about whether he leaves or what he does, or I should say, will there be an election? I think the most interesting and possible idea is that he will cancel the election because coronavirus is so bad. Do you put any merit behind that?
No, because if he...
You cut out. Are you there? Come back, Bill.
Was present.
Come back. You cut out on me, your audio, for some reason. If
he does not hold an election, I shouldn't even say it's not even up to him, it's up to the states, right? But if there is no election held, or somewhere between November and January 21st, then Nancy Pelosi, it's right there in black and white in the Constitution, she would be president. End of story. So there's no way to dodge out of it by just not holding an election.
I have never heard that. I have to look that up and confirm it.
Look it up. It's there in black and white in the Constitution.
Then why are people like Siegel saying that he could cancel the election?
Well, I think what people are worried about is Trump doing something like the one super attenuated, crazy way to do it. States can vote for where their electors go, right? So the state would have, all these states would have to say, our election was we couldn't do the presidential election, but the state legislature is going to vote all of our electoral votes to Donald Trump, right? That's a way to do it. There's no guarantee that even conservative states would want to do that, right? Because you need enough of them for Trump, to Trump to get over the hump. If they canceled the vote in Pennsylvania and then the Pennsylvania legislature voted their electors to Donald Trump, then we're in a state of civil war, and people shouldn't buy away from that. I mean, I've been asking people, well-educated suburbanites, this specific question: what do you do if Donald Trump actually steals the election? And I got to tell you something. And granted, this is DC. There's a lot more people around who have a military background or, security policy background or something like that. Almost to a person, they say it means civil war. Quite literally civil war.
Well, what does that mean? What does civil war mean?
Civil war means there'll be violence.
Yeah, what does the violence look like?
Oh, I think that you would start out with protests that were off the scale of anything we've seen in size and in violence towards security. forces in D.C. I think you would see that in most major cities. I think it would be tough for the White House to even do anything because you would find states starting to say, no, fuck you. I don't think you're a legitimate White House. You're not a legitimate administration. You would see the country fracture, quite literally. And it's a different sort of thing than happened in 1860 because then there was the one issue, slavery or not slavery. And that was how things broke out. And it was very regional, relatively speaking.
Right.
This would not be. This would be rural America, upstate New York versus Manhattan. So I don't think any of this happens, by the way, because I think that people would be even the people who love Trump, when push comes to shove, I think that would be one step too far. But that is the ultimate result of that is if you overthrow, Trump would have to literally overthrow the government in order to steal the next election. Right. That's what that would be. And I just don't think he's got the calions to do it. I just don't.
So let's go back to the winter and Joe Biden is president. And is that what I think that's what you were saying? And it's winter 2021. It's February. It's his first 100 days. How does coronavirus end? Where does it end?
It doesn't end, but the things that happen get us there. Biden says, okay, now I'm setting up a national policy on masks. We're setting up a national policy on testing. We're sending in the National Guard to every state. They're leaving their guns at home. We're going to have a testing program in every town, on every corner. Everyone gets tested all the time. We really enforce quarantines on people. We do what they did in Italy for a month or 2 months. And we also, by the way, do a bunch of programs to help out businesses, to help out individuals. We add money to welfare programs. We pay the money that keeps people from falling completely apart during this. And we do an absolute proper lockdown like they did in Germany. And then you get out of it fairly quickly. If we had done that in April, we'd be talking about Corona being over and Donald Trump would have a 60% approval rating right now. Right. So that is what it's going to take, short of a miraculous vaccine popping up tomorrow.
Right.
That's what it's going to take. It's going to take a national effort. And until we have a national effort, this is just going to be our reality.
All right. Well, I think that the most important thing that you said was that it never ends, in a sense, because the question I'm asking is kind of a typical media, to make it interesting, a binary. When does it end? When is it over?
Right.
And the Vietnam War never ended for those who were in it and fought in it. It might have the fear of having to be drafted or having to go serve or having to die in the war while you're still in the war. That might have ended. But the question about when does the coronavirus end? It's like, when does the economic collapse of 2008 end? It never did. It hasn't ended for my wife and I with our mortgage. It never ended for those who took their lives, who lost everything, who are about to retire and lost everything. So in a sense, it never ends for our kids who had to live through it and who lost memories and so on. And so I think we need to, maybe I'm asking the question wrong, or obviously there just needs to be more nuance to it, which is why I'm glad that you fell for the binary kind of question. But then once we taped a conversation and had a long, nuanced conversation, you proved that it's not a fair question to answer succinctly.
Right. And by the way, I have some thoughts on what the longer term implications of it are.
Sure.
Because they're going to be really profound. Commercial real estate in cities is going to be devalued enormously. You're going to see a lot of urban centers become more residential rather than commercial realty. That has all these incredibly huge effects. You're going to see things that no one ever bothered to do before, wanted to do before, because interest groups are too powerful, of much more pedestrian access in cities than vehicle access. You're going to see the further decline of the sort of J.D. Vance, white Appalachian America. Absolutely going to come from this, because in the end, they're going to get even harder hit by what's happening.
Why is that? Because, I wonder, you probably could argue that certain communities like that are going to do a lot better as well. I feel like that might be a dangerous generalization, and I only have one data point or argument for it, which is in Catskill, New York, which is about 2 hours north of Manhattan. the homes are being bid upon like an auction by wealthy people. So these communities where they have been, especially in upstate New York, I mean, that's where I'm from. This is the area that I know best in the country. And, you know, those communities were hollowed out by, as everybody understands, the causes and catalysts. Actually, most people probably don't, but you can imagine big industries, factories, manufacturers, et cetera, that were there. GE in Schenectady, Carrier in Syracuse. You've got Kodak in Rochester, and Buffalo had probably a company that I can't think of. But those cities and everything south of them, between that and New York City, that's all going to be maybe revitalized because people are leaving a giant city like New York City and buying property. Is there any, what do you think about like some of those more suburban rural areas that you're saying are going to be damaged? They're going to be hurt the most, but I understand why that might be obvious in certain places, but in other places they might be helped the most, is what I'm trying to say. Well,
you're going to see that in the littoral spaces around major cities.
What's littoral mean?
Meaning like the
fuck kind of word is that? Jesus.
So in other words, if New York is an island, and the middle of that island is Manhattan. The beach outside of New York is the Catskills. People aren't going to go much farther than the Catskills, right? So you're going to get some of that happening near to big cities, right? But in the end, those places still don't have great schools. In the end, they still don't have the sort of lifestyle experiences that cities have. And so you will get, and the temporary distortion of the market is everybody's running to live in those places. But you know what else is happening? You cannot buy a house in my neighborhood in Washington, D.C. without getting outbid by about $100,000.
So at the same time, cities are being, we think people are vacating. The market distortion is that they're also buying. Like how much do you know about that trend? Why is that in D.C. or anywhere else?
Two things. Number one, in D.C., if I have the money, I already have a vacation house that I can sneak off to, right?
Right.
But also maybe I don't have a job where I can't really commute in all the time. Maybe I deal with top secret work once in a while that I can't take out of the office. Maybe I'm in a job like real estate where I have to literally see people and be in the location. So what's happening is you're going to have things go either farther out in sort of vacation-y areas around places like New York, or downtown in a place like Washington, D.C. You don't want to be on the metro? Well, live downtown, right? That's already been happening. That will just be accelerated. But where it's not going to go is West Virginia, is Tennessee, is all these places where things were bad already, and where local hospitals, for instance, were not that great, and the population was a little bit older. Well, guess what just happened? That older population just took an even bigger disproportionate hit of people dying from COVID. And you're going to see that the economic effects of that are going to make places that are sort of J.D. Vance's America will decline that much more. It's not going to kill cities. It's really not. Cities in the end will be fine, because cities will just rebuild and recalibrate themselves. Big commercial offices are no longer a good idea. No problem. We can turn them into $5,000 a month condos, right? But if you're a rural place where 10% of everybody over 70 died, and that one of those guys was running the last general store, the other one owned the last hardware store in town, they're like the employers in a place like rural West Virginia.
Right.
It's not good. They're losing the people who had the most social and probably economic capital. They're going to lose more of them relative to their size. Well,
I hope you're wrong about that, but I think there's a lot that points to that being a pretty possible, maybe accurate outcome. What else?
Yeah.
What else do you see? How this concludes, if it concludes. I mean, I know we shouldn't probably be talking, you and I, about public health in terms of recording it and sharing it, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But with you and I want to ask, like, a Peter Hotez, and Aaron Carroll, the question about vaccines. But in terms of there being a vaccine, one of the questions I have is, let's say there's a vaccine. Let's say it's pretty effective and accurate. Who knows when it comes, right? But if it does, you need a high percentage of people to take it for it to be effective. Right. And that has not been the case with the flu vaccine.
Right.
Enough people weren't getting vaccinated with the flu vaccine to the point where we still lost 80,000 people a year. And so now, the thing that is dominating my mind, Bill, and I don't know how much you think about it, but is how far and deep the conspiracy theories have traveled, to the point being there are so many people that believe that there is a global pedophile ring and that Trump is fighting it and is going to soon reveal everything. And Christ is going to come back. And vaccines are just bad. That even if there were an effective vaccine, you would have so many people that just won't get it that it wouldn't matter. That's my biggest concern.
Right. I would say this. QAnon is basically going to be 20% of the GOP if it's not already.
Yeah, I don't know where you get 20%. I don't know what it is, but it's high and it's spreading. The conspiracy theories are spreading in a way like this virus is spreading, in the same way, which is why it's always been so accurate to call, videos on YouTube or anywhere else viral. Because as the videos go viral, as the tweets go viral, as the information or disinformation goes viral, it picks a certain percentage of people off. I mean, have you seen this Wayfair conspiracy theory?
I have,
it's gotten so popular so fast.
Right. Well, I gave my 20%, Pete, on a real life anecdote that I have found that just absolutely stuns me. Because Russia's paying bounties for the Taliban. We talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the people that I've talked to who still support Trump, family members or whatever, eventually the conversation came down to, okay, you guys are finding all these motivated people who work for Trump who are like, well, maybe were wondering about the psyche of the Russians when they were doing this, all this language designed to kind of redirect the discussion. But in that, it's turned out that it's proven the Russians have been arming the Taliban. So I say to people who grew up in the Cold War, who thought Red Dawn was a great movie, who all voted for Ronald Reagan, I say, okay, so why do we give a shit about the psyche of Vladimir Putin? They're arming the Taliban. You either respond or you don't, right? But the Russians are giving bullets to guys who are shooting at American troops. And these people who loved Ronald Reagan, thought Red Dawn was great, they go, well, that's just a Democratic hoax. So it's not even you don't even need QAnon craziness. There is in people who support Republicans, who support the GOP, at their core, they are completely and totally partisan conspiracy theorists.
Right.
That's it.
Trump cultists.
And they're not going to get any better until they get their ass handed to them many times in elections. That's it.
I don't know if that changes anything about what they believe.
Maybe not, but at least they start to become more of a rump than they are, and because it's so I think in the long term, when we're talking about going back to Corona, those folks are still going to just say, it's all bullshit. I'm not wearing a mask. And there'll be people throwing huge protests against Joe Biden for mandating it nationally, should he win, knock on wood. So we're in like an 1850s situation. It's all this stuff is that the virus is just turning into sort of a focus of it. But we're going to be in a really troubled political situation until the people who are running the current Republican Party are gone and white male voters who have lost their minds are no longer in a strong political position.
Yeah, and I don't see that ever changing because you'll always have right-wing media that profits from and actually, to some extent believes in a lot of the crazy conspiracy theories, the things that just are not happening. Or they don't believe in things that are happening, like the Newtown shooting. So it goes all kinds of ways. No, who is this? What do you?
David Wasserman, the redistrict guy.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
He's fucking great, and he is a guru of.
I know him from Twitter.
Right. Okay. You're right. He is a guru of the nerded out, semi-autistic numbers guys that I know who are all about politics. And I mean semi-autistic in a positive way.
Yeah, no, I know. I get it. There's a lot of
like they so lock in on all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what Wasserman's been pointing out is that the percentage of the voting public that are white men who voted for Trump went down some insane number just from 2016. I think it was from 47% to 44%, which 3%, big deal. That's unbelievably big as a number in demographics and voting. And then I think it was white women who voted for Trump went down by like 2%. It's a wild thing. And my point is that it's hard to see it sort of, every 2-year cycle. But the voting population that supports Trumpism is dying off real fast.
Or having their mind changed? Or
no, they're literally dying. It's mortality. It's mortality that's doing it. Older white male baby boomers are dying fairly quickly. And when those folks die, guess what? It's the fact of life. There's one less Republican Trump voter out there. And so I do, while it does absolutely appall me how shitty the situation we are in is and how shitty I think it's going to be for 8-10 years, we're actually not that far from a situation where those folks become fairly irrelevant politically.
Bill B. in D.C., always great to get your perspective on these things. If you agree with Bill, if you disagree, if you want to add to it, I'd love to keep this conversation going and see where this situation goes in our country. Appreciate it, man. That was really interesting. Great to talk to you as always.
All right, buddy. Be good. Be safe.
Bye. That is Bill C. That's his Twitter handle as well, at Bill B. in D.C. Love talking to him. Finally, on today's show, I reached out to my friend Barry Hummel, longtime listener and subscriber. He is a physician, a pediatrician who runs a great nonprofit down in Florida, who uses his skills and expertise to tackle one of the biggest public health problems in the United States, tobacco addiction. He is the co-founder of Quit Doc Foundation, and as the group's only pediatrician, he's been instrumental in developing tobacco awareness and prevention programs for children and teenagers in Florida. And since he is a doctor in Florida, I figured he would be a great person to talk to about what the hell is happening with coronavirus in Florida. Here's my conversation with Dr. Barry Hummel, and check him out at quitdoc.com. All right, I've got him now, Dr. Barry Hummel, my friend down in Florida. Broward County, is that right, Dr. Hummel?
Yep, Broward County. I'm in Parkland, right by the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
Oh, that's a sad place that we all recognize now for horrific.
That started 2 of my greatest years ever, as you can imagine.
Because why? I mean, I know why.
Well, because that just seemed to roll. We rolled from that to like that poor high school. They had to be off for a bunch of time in 2018 because of the shooting, and they're talking already about it's going to take a whole generation of turnover, 4 classes before it stabilizes. And then we get to this year, and then we got to shut down for another 3 months. So the class of 2020 who just graduated having survived that school shooting, and then turn around and miss their entire senior year, and I live a mile from school. So
you don't have a child in that school? You don't have kids?
My kids both graduated. My youngest son graduated in 2012. So they had already finished with the school. And
wow. Yeah.
But I have neighbors. My next door neighbor coaches lacrosse over there. They lost the athletic director that day. It was brutal. My neighbor went, I would go outside. He'd be in a suit like every other day for a week because he was going to multiple memorial services or funerals. It was just awful.
There's a number of communities, obviously the Orlando, that Pulse shooting, that have been devastated by violence. And now look at what is happening in your state in terms of coronavirus now in Florida. I reached out and asked for folks that are listeners that live in Florida or Texas or Arizona. And you sent me this email where you started, Barry. As you know, Pete, Florida is winning, which is hilarious if it wasn't so sad. But first of all, before we really get into it, what kind of physician are you?
I'm a pediatrician by training, but I do tobacco prevention exclusively down here with Tobacco Free Florida. Right.
And we should talk about that a whole segment at some point, just discussing that very, very important issue. I want to talk with you, though, about where Florida is at and where do you think it's going. You wrote, we now hold the record for new daily cases, 15,300, beating New York's record of 12,274 on April 4. That's crazy. That's a crazy record to hold. I'm so sorry to hear about how bad it's gotten there. What do you attribute it to?
No consistency in the response. I think if you look at the federal response, which was defer to the states, and then the states turned around, many of them, not all of them, turned around and then deferred to the counties. And in the places that didn't, like New York, where they had a consistent policy statewide, you couldn't jump from county to county and bring the disease across the county borders. So what happened in Florida that was so bad is when you defer to the counties, when Broward, where I live, Miami-Dade, which is just south of me, and Palm Beach, which is just north of me, when they all decide they're going to shut down, but Miami-Dade maybe isn't going to shut down the beaches, they're only going to shut down the restaurants, then all the folks from Broward just go down to the beach in Miami-Dade. And then when Miami-Dade realizes what's going on, they shut it down. Well, now we'll go up to Martin County, which is just above Palm Beach. It allowed people to actually migrate with the disease, not shelter in place, but actually move around the state. And so with the hot spots are, mostly big cities. Jacksonville obviously has been a hot spot. Orlando is raging right now. And so we'll just open Disney World. I mean, it just there's no logical sense to the way we're handling it here in Florida.
Yeah, I heard Disney World is not being called the Magic Kingdom, but the Tragic Kingdom, which
I pointed out the other day is I said the mouse must be very happy because, the bubonic plague was also spread by rodents. So thank you, Mickey.
Oh, man, you got to try to find the humor, and it's really hard to find because it's devastating what's happening in your state of Florida. How are people reacting to it? You also told me in this email a little bit about your friends, your social group, your close-knit community, and how people are on different pages. I think across the country that's the case. I mean, even spouses are on different pages. My wife and I have been arguing about what we can and what we should be doing. Of course, I'm the more conservative one, and she wants to get out and do more things, and we have. How have you and your wife handled it? What about in your close-knit community?
Well, in our home, we're pretty much on the same page, but the one thing is that my wife works at Cleveland Clinic as a physician, and so my worst point of contact is going to be her. I'm as socially distanced as possible. I wear a mask whenever possible, but I know that my biggest risk factor is if she just comes home because she's been exposed at the hospital. But we've done a really, really good job, and we're watching. So we're runners, as you know. We do some amateur coaching. We have a lot of friends who've gone out. They've started to loosen up the rules on how they're going to run together or bike together. And you see pictures on Facebook or on social media of them hanging out after they've run, and none of them are wearing masks. They've sort of loosened up the rules of what they're going to do. They're in groups. They're not giant groups. Don't get me wrong. It's not groups of 20 or 30, but it's a group of 8 people after a bike ride all posing together for a photo, and nobody's really social distancing or wearing a mask. I understand during exercise, the heat index down here, Pete, I can't tell you.
Yeah,
it's noticeably different just anecdotally. Like, I know this is going to be the hottest summer on record because every day we break a record. The heat index is always over 100 degrees. You cannot wear a mask when you exercise. So my choice is I exercise by myself. I'm not going to go in a group of people because I don't want to put myself in that kind of risk. And it's just a little bit looser here and it's a little bit looser there. And I just feel like people are letting their guard down. So the other night we had a coaches meeting because we're trying to figure out how we're going to do this year. And there were 8 people on the meeting. 2 of the people had a point of contact. One sister was positive, and she was being tested to make sure she wasn't positive. And somebody else was in quarantine because their kid went to a summer camp where they had an exposure. That's 25% of the people I'm on a Zoom meeting with about let's decide how we're going to coach this year. So there's a disconnect. We can't coach this year. How are we going to do that when we already have 25% of us saying we're sitting it out because we're quarantined for 2 weeks?
What is it about Florida, and how do you see people just anecdotally behaving? I mean, it seems like in New York, everybody's wearing a mask. I live in Rockland County. Everybody's wearing a mask in New York City for the most part. But I hear in other parts of the country, even at a time of a real spike in Florida, that's not necessarily the case. Anecdotally, what are you seeing and hearing about the way that people are adhering or not to the guidelines?
I go out fairly infrequently. I go to a grocery store. I go to, shopping or whatever. I see pretty consistent wearing of masks where I've been the places that I've been for the most part. I've seen a handful of people. Florida's a purple state, so it really depends on where you live. I live in a very, very, very blue county. And all of South Florida, really, Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Broward are all fairly blue. So most people are playing by the rules. I think the biggest thing is because people are stir crazy and it's a beautiful place to go outside. We live here so we can go outside, 365 days a year. And people want to be out on the beach. They don't understand that, if it's a few people on the beach is different than that we're going to all go sit and cluster on the beach. And so people seem to be willing to take the chance outdoors. The indoor venues, there's a strip down in Broward or in Fort Lauderdale called Las Olas Boulevard, a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars. They're constantly going in there. The restaurants are open to 50% capacity. They're not really following the rules consistently. They're getting fined all the time. And people were obviously going in there. There was a picture the other day of our old friend Roger Stone, who went immediately to a bar after he was exonerated by the president. And,
oh, wow.
A picture of him with eight guys in a bar, and none of them wearing masks. So one, there's the issue that they don't wear a mask, but the other one is that a bar would condone that behavior.
Right. You say a bar would condone that behavior by allowing Roger Stone into the bar? That's what you mean?
I'm saying 8 people sitting at the bar. Well, yeah, I mean.
Roger fucking Stone. Unbelievable. Okay, so, yeah. I mean, what is the feeling down there? I mean, what do you attribute to? Florida's such a weird state. You got this horrible governor, in my opinion, DeSantis, who recently, a few weeks ago, he was harsh about, what was it, New York? Or whoever he was saying, this is an infamous quote now, where he was demanding an apology from other states. And now, of course, there's a major outbreak in his state. And I wonder if he's going to apologize. And I wonder if he's going to take any responsibility at all.
No, he's, they're already passed the buck. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, it was had to do with the Hispanics. They were the reason there was such a big surge in the state. He said that a few weeks back. They had a public health person who was mining the data and putting it up on a web page. He didn't like the way the data was going. I remember that woman was fired from the Department of Health because, the facts, they didn't want all the facts up on their clearinghouse of information for the state.
So scapegoating Hispanic people, not being transparent and honest about public health statistics. What else?
Not consistently. I don't see him consistently wearing a mask, when he goes out in public places.
Not role modeling.
Not really role modeling good behavior. Yeah. Right. And those things would all make a huge difference.
Yeah.
To have a realistic approach. The thing about it that bothers me is they all want to fix the economic problem, but the economic problem is an offshoot of a public health problem. And if you don't fix the public health problem, you can't ever correct.
Right. It's always been a false choice.
Right.
I mean, you can't force people to go out and buy things and spend money. You can't. If people are scared, they're just not going to go out, most likely.
Right. There's a whole group, by the way, that like myself, where, I'm trying to spend some money in the community, and so I go get takeout food or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to do my part, but I'm not going to go sit in a restaurant. I'm not going to go join my friends for mimosas after a long run on a Saturday morning and all the stuff that we might have done 6 months ago. Right. I miss it dearly. I really, really do. You take an entire social life and you kind of scrap it. I have that gives me some sadness. I would really like to be out participating in the things that I love to do with my friends. But I'm a pragmatist in that I know what this can do, this illness, and I, don't want to take a chance with it. I'm in a slightly at-risk population given my age. I don't want to put myself at risk. I don't want to put my family at risk. And so, I'm going to gut it out. I'm so proud of myself because I'm not a prepper. I don't have a bunker. I didn't stockpile ammo. And yet I can survive without a haircut, unlike all the guys who prepped and bought the ammo and had to storm Michigan to say, I want a haircut. What will they do in the zombie apocalypse?
Yeah. It's a really good point about the fact that we're all going through this together. Why are some of us dealing with it so much better than than others. Really well said. So, Dr. Hummel, let me ask you, forget Florida for a second, where you live and where this major spike is and where there's been some pretty terrible leadership and decision-making, to say the least. And my big question this week is, how do you see this ending if it ends? I mean, where do you see this going for our nation, coronavirus? My big concern I've been sharing with everybody is, even if we had an effective vaccine, it won't be effective if enough people don't take it. And enough people are skeptical about the vaccine. Enough people think that Wayfair is selling kids online, so they're not going to take a vaccine. Where do you, that's my big concern. And even if we have a vaccine, not enough people take it to create the herd immunity that we need. Where do you see us going?
Right. When it started right out of the gate, Pete, and I realized it was going to jump across that we were going to have it here. That unlike Ebola, it was going to make it to our shores and we were going to have to deal with this. I said to myself, see you next year. I thought from the moment it started, we were a year out from having any sense of normalcy. I think part of that is, some knowledge of what happened with the pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic, and realizing how long that lasted and things like that. I figured a vaccine would be the answer, but of course I'm very pro-vaccine, having seen, when I was in training as a pediatrician in the early 90s, I watched Haemophilus influenza B meningitis disappear from the planet as a result of a new vaccine. That was the first disease I watched melt away before my eyes because of a vaccine. I'm very pro-vaccine, so I don't know that a vaccine is going to work 100% like you would say a measles vaccine, or whether it's going to be more like the flu vaccine where we have to go every year, or whether it's even going to work. But I was just guessing a year. What I couldn't anticipate was, and I don't know why, because this also happened in the Spanish flu pandemic, how tired people would get so quickly to just sitting still, and how they're marching in the streets for the right to march in the streets, and by marching in the streets, they put themselves at risk. Throw what's happened with the Black Lives Matter protests into the mix on top of that, and completely different reason to be on the street. But you just go, people they don't have the patience to wait it out until there's an actual answer or a cure. And that I didn't anticipate. I thought it was going to be a year anyway. I just didn't think we were going to rev it up on purpose like we're doing.
I feel like there's a lot of truth to the point about patience, but I also feel like there's a lot of truth to the point about, at least in our country, doesn't have a culture of any kind of solidarity or community amongst each other. We have a real unfortunate, but skepticism of anything that government wants to do. Anything with the word public in it is bad now, which is terrible. You see other nations, from South Korea to Israel to, even Spain and Italy, where they had major outbreaks. There's a sense of community in those countries. In China, it might not be a sense of community, but it's a communist country. It's a command economy. They do what they're told. They beat that drum and everybody goes inside, or else. I mean, America, we just don't have that. It's just this culture of individualism. No one can tell me what to do. Don't you think that has a lot to do with it?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that's going to be our undoing as a nation is that, yes, we were rugged individualists who came over and tamed an entire continent with some problems attached to that, like slavery and genocide of the native people. But
right.
we came over here and tamed that. And somehow that's the legacy that we're going to drag with us kicking and screaming, is that I'm going to go down by myself as a rugged individual, as opposed to realizing you would think something like this would point out what I'm fascinated by. And I look at Joe Biden's campaign. Is this not the time to show how all the countries that had a good public health system and universal health care seem to do better with this than we did? Isn't it time to point that out and say, maybe this is why we need to push for at least a public option, at least an alternative for people who can't afford the private market? We can't even turn this crisis into something that's simple. So
it's a great point. This crisis creates an opportunity to, change so many things that it lays bare in terms of what's wrong with so many of our systems, and especially our healthcare system. I mean,
I wonder if that would have gotten more play, Pete, because we are seeing a social change movement with Black Lives Matter. And that really was born out of the pandemic for whatever reason, whether it was that people were sitting around at home and they saw more of that clip and that's what spurred that on, or whether it was people wanted to get outside and that was a great excuse. Whatever it is, you had your guest today who said, if you'd have told me that the flag was going to come down off Mississippi and that Woodrow Wilson's name was going to come off that building at Princeton, I'd have told you hell had frozen over.
Right.
And yet that stuff's all happened, and that's happened because of COVID to a certain degree.
Yeah, I agree.
But we've spent a lot of time talking about that, which is awesome. And I think that took maybe a little bit of the discussion of public health, universal health care, and those kinds of things off the table.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I think there's a trade-off there, but it's like there needs to be a lot more of a discussion about racism and racial injustice in this country. Then I'm not going to say there doesn't need to be a discussion about public health, about health care, about health insurance, our system. But Barry, I mean, like discussing and debating wearing a mask and socially distancing. I mean, how are those two things so divisive? How are they liberal or conservative? It's become divisive. Just those things. They don't deserve a long debate or conversation the way understanding our history and our systems and systemic racism do. I mean, that deserves an education. This, we don't need to be educated. Just wear a fucking mask and stay away from me. I mean, that's it.
Yeah, that was probably in part because of the ambivalence from the leadership.
Sure.
I'm talking about the president. And
yeah.
He puts a team together that comes out and says, wear a mask. And then he says, I don't believe in masks. Then he won't wear a mask.
Yeah.
And so the average person was looking at that. Where do you weigh in on that? When, you're being told one thing and you're being told another. Now, I would go with the scientist and not the, reality show star for my science information. But, all being said, I saw Bill Nye did a thing the other day, which I either have to replicate or share. He put a mask on and tried to blow a candle out. You can't do it. It's the most obvious thing that shows you can't get air through a cloth mask. It was so cool. And he put different kinds of masks on, and he was blowing on these candles, and then it came up that I had to watch an ad to see the end of it. And I don't know that I want to share that because that's kind of frustrating.
I'm going to make my own. I bet you I can blow it out. I bet you I can. I'm going to blow through that mask. I'm going to do it. It's interesting.
I do look a little tougher than Bill Nye, the science guy. I might have a little more lung capacity, But I thought that was an interesting way to just demonstrate that for people, just the simple stuff. Somebody put up a thing the other day about how exactly was it phrased? It was something about if you can fart through underwear and pants and I could still smell it, what's a mask going to help us with? And I just went, well, that's because methane's a gas which actually can get through cloth. And coronavirus is a living organism that's carried by droplets that can't get through the mask. It's science. It's a real thing.
Also, a lot of those people just clearly don't have the most powerful farts. I can rip right through an underwear with a good one. I mean, I've ripped through 3 layers one time, and flames came out of my ass, but I don't want to brag.
Wow.
I don't know if that's just an anecdote. There's no randomized controlled study on my farts. But that brings me to a question for you about, you're a physician and you rely on best science and data to understand tobacco's effect on the human body in so many different ways. How do you know and how do you decide what to trust? And what would you say to people who aren't physicians trying to figure all this out?
Well, much like I'm not as good at picking apart a study as Aaron Carroll is, but when you look at studies and data, you have to look at the type of the study. You also have to look at who's funded the study. If it's funded by the industry, you have to look at that with a more jaded eye than if you were looking at an independent group at a university. I use a lot of, I like meta-analysis, which are, for when you look at smoking cessation data, for example, I like to look at the studies that lump all the studies together that were similar, because then you have a larger number and you have a better statistical look at whether something actually worked or not, because the numbers are larger.
A study of all the studies.
Yeah, it's sort
meta-analysis. Yeah,
right. So if a bunch of different places did a study on, say, nicotine replacement patches for tobacco cessation, and this guy studied 150, and this one studied 500. If you lump them together and you get a total of 5,000, the data is more apt to be true than if you look at a smaller number. You can always get quirks in the data when the numbers are smaller. And so there's a lot of good organizations that do that, particularly in tobacco prevention, that review a lot of that data. And of course, the Department of Health and Human Services has a lot of interest in tobacco use. So they publish a lot of great stuff, including the Surgeon General's reports, which come out periodically on various topics with tobacco. So whenever I look at a study, I'm having a cat fight here, Pete. Please.
Oh my God. I was, can we hear it? I thought it was.
They're out of control.
Oh, they ran away. I thought it was a baby. Those were cats fighting with each other?
Yeah, it's my two cats. Two of my three cats. They're back behind the blue screen. They're hiding from. There you go.
All right. Is it quitdoc.com? Is that still you?
Yep, that's me. QUITDOC.
To learn more about Barry's work, go to quitdoc.com. What else can I plug for you? We got to get into all of your work for a whole segment at some point.
Yeah, well, we talked about doing that, and then the protests started happening, and but that's okay.
Let's make
you sat in on one of my talks.
I did. It was really. I was listening to your talk while I was in the garden. It was fascinating, really fascinating, and really well presented by you. I thoroughly enjoyed it and learned a lot. So I do want to have that talk with you. So, but thanks for talking to me about this today, and I hope people will check you out. Quitdoc.com. What else do I need to plug? Anything else? Social media?
Well, I have an Instagram, BL Hummel. I just put up personal photos and, garden photography and
cool.
An occasional beer drinking. But.
Follow you right now on that. Well, listen, dude, before I go, I want to say on the record how much I appreciate all of your support. You're a really thoughtful guy. You've been amazingly kind to me and generous to me and supportive to me in so many different ways. And I'm glad that I can't thank you enough for that. And I really appreciate you joining me tonight.
I can't tell you, just super quick. The day I knew something was up, and the day I turned on the radio and you did the bit where this is my last show on Sirius, I was crushed. I'd never been crushed when a show was canceled before,
yeah.
But you were appointment listening for me for a very long time. I mean, I listened back when you were on the super early mornings, the 6 a.m. slot.
Yeah, I
really
remember.
got the habit of it.
I remember.
And then it was appointment listening, and I learned so much from your show and enjoyed your guests so much. And what I liked about it was long conversations with smart people where it wasn't, you didn't get cut off mid-thought. People had time to let them tell the story correctly. And then it was pointedly funny. I thought that the news, I really started listening to Catch News because it was 6 o'clock in the morning. You guys would come on and do about 40 minutes of headlines.
Yeah.
And I got to where that's what I listened to in the morning for news because at least I got a chuckle out of it. And I was crushed when that happened.
Yeah, it never gets it never gets easy to hear that. And there was thousands of people who were, I had so many men, reaching out saying, I'm crying about this. It never gets easy to hear it, but I'm really excited about what's going on with the podcast now, and I couldn't do it without people supporting me like you. So thank you so much, buddy, for what you just said and for all of your support. You're an awesome guy. I love talking to you, and I love reading your emails and corresponding with you and having you in my life. So thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thanks for talking to me, buddy. All right, we'll talk again soon. All right, that is it. That is today's episode. Thank you very much to Andy Bacevich, Bruce Bartlett, Bill Boyle, and Dr. Barry Hummel down there in Florida. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, you got something to say and a good way of saying it, I'd love to hear from you, especially if you have an answer for how coronavirus ends. That's a question I'd like to reach out and talk to just about anybody about. There are probably no wrong answers. It's nothing but uncertainty. So much depends on science, the vaccine, the election, public policy, and more. So I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to join the show, I'd love to have you on. And I got to get more ladies on as well. So more female listeners, subscribers. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to join me in conversation, reach out and email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. If you're not already supporting the podcast with a paid subscription, now is the time to do it right now. The show is over, and you should just go over to patreon.com and sign up for a subscription so we can help sustain this podcast and so that I can build a studio out in my shed and look out on my garden and keep bringing you these great guests and conversations each and every day, because that's the goal. All right, I'm out of time. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. I love you. I want to hear from you. I want to talk to you, and I will talk to you right here tomorrow. I'll be here if you will.